The night my father retired was supposed to be about him, about his 35 years of loyalty, his promotions, his reputation. Instead, it became the night they reminded me I was nothing. I'm Lily Anderson. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, I've lived in the shadow of a man who measured worth in titles, income, and applause. My father worked at one of the largest corporate firms in our state, a respected operations executive, the kind of man who never missed a deadline but often missed dinner. Growing up, I learned early that achievement wasn't celebrated in our house, it was expected, unless it was mine. You see, I didn't follow the path my parents designed for me. I didn't become a corporate manager or a lawyer or an executive assistant climbing the same building floors my father did. I built something different, something quieter, something they didn't understand. I started my own consulting firm at 23. Not flashy, not headline making, just consistent, strategic business analysis work for mid-sized companies struggling with internal efficiency. I worked long hours. I studied markets. I built relationships carefully and slowly. It grew. But because I didn't talk about it loudly, because I didn't parade numbers at family dinners, because my success didn't look like a corner office with my name on the glass, to them, it didn't exist. The retirement party was held at the company's grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, polished floors, corporate banners with my father's name printed across them, celebrating 35 years of excellence. I wore a simple navy dress, elegant but understated. My mother adjusted my sleeve before we entered. "Try to be supportive tonight," she whispered. "Supportive," I nodded. Inside, executives mingled with champagne glasses in hand. Colleagues laughed loudly. Stories were shared about late nights and major deals. And everywhere I walked, I heard the same thing. "You must be so proud of your father." I was. But pride is complicated when it's one-directional. When dinner was served, speeches began. Senior managers praised his leadership. They spoke about discipline, growth, mentorship. Then it was my mother's turn. She stood confidently at the podium. "We've always valued hard work in our family," she began warmly. "My husband gave everything to this company. He sacrificed weekends, holidays, even family time." Soft laughter. Then she added something I wasn't prepared for. "And while not all of our children followed in his ambitious footsteps, we're still proud in our own way." There it was. Polite dismissal. The room chuckled gently. I felt heat rise to my face. Not rage, just that familiar tightening in my chest. The invisible comparison. The unspoken judgment. Then my father took the microphone. He thanked his team, his mentors, his supervisors. "And finally, my daughter Lily is here tonight," he said. "She's finding her own way." Finding her own way. A phrase reserved for people who haven't arrived anywhere yet. More soft laughter, more polite smiles. And then he added the line that made the air shift for me forever. "She's not really in the corporate world, but not everyone is cut out for this level." A few executives exchanged awkward glances. I smiled. Because smiling is easier than defending yourself in someone else's spotlight. But inside, something hardened. Not anger, clarity. You see, what my father didn't know, what my mother didn't know, was that earlier that week, I had signed a contract that would restructure one of the largest regional supply chains in this very industry. And the man overseeing that initiative? My father's boss, the CEO. I had worked with him quietly for 8 months. Strategic consultations, efficiency audits, private performance modeling. He knew exactly who I was. But tonight, he hadn't spoken yet. As the applause faded, I noticed him at the head table. Calm, observant, watching. Then something unexpected happened. The event coordinator approached him and whispered something. He nodded slowly and stood up. The room quieted immediately. When the CEO stands, everyone listens. "I wasn't originally scheduled to speak again," he began smoothly. "But there's something I'd like to acknowledge before we close tonight." My father looked surprised but pleased. The CEO held a thin folder in his hand, white, unassuming. He glanced briefly in my direction. And then, back to the audience. "Earlier this year, he continued. Our company faced operational challenges that required outside strategic expertise. We brought in a consultant who completely transformed our efficiency model. I felt the room subtly shift. He worked privately, quietly, without needing recognition. A pause. Then, she? My father's smile faltered slightly. The CEO opened the folder and read the name printed clearly at the top. Lily Anderson. The ballroom went completely silent, and for the first time that night, every eye in the room turned toward me. For a few seconds after my name left the CEO's mouth, no one moved. It wasn't dramatic. There was no gasp. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy because everyone is recalculating something in their mind. My father blinked once, twice, as if he thought he had misheard. The CEO adjusted his glasses and continued calmly. Yes, Lily Anderson has been working closely with our executive strategy team for the past 8 months. Her analysis helped us identify operational inefficiencies that were costing us nearly 12% annually. A soft murmur moved across the ballroom. 12%? In a company of that size, that wasn't small, that was millions. My mother's posture stiffened beside me. My father remained seated at the head table, his smile now frozen in place. The CEO went on. She declined public recognition when we first completed the restructuring. She requested that the focus remain on the internal teams implementing the changes. He looked directly at me now. But tonight, since we are celebrating dedication and impact, I believe it's important to acknowledge hers. The room began to clap. Not loud at first, just polite. But then the board members joined, then department heads, and slowly, the applause grew stronger. It wasn't just courtesy anymore. It was respect. I stood up not dramatically, not proudly, just steady. I didn't look at my father yet. I looked at the CEO and nodded once. He gestured slightly toward the stage. Lily, would you join me? The walk to the podium felt longer than it actually was. Every step carried years of quiet work, late nights, doubt, self-discipline, independence built without validation. When I reached the stage, the CEO handed me the folder. Inside were performance reports, before and after data models. My name printed clearly under strategic consultant. He leaned toward the microphone again. Talent doesn't always wear a title, he said. And leadership doesn't always sit in the corner office. That line lingered. Then he stepped aside, giving me the microphone. I hadn't prepared a speech. I hadn't expected to speak at all. But I had learned something in business. When opportunity appears unexpectedly, you don't freeze, you focus. I took a slow breath. Thank you, I began calmly. This company already had strong leadership. My role was simply to ask different questions. My voice was steady, not defensive, not triumphant. I believe efficiency isn't about working harder. It's about understanding where energy is being wasted. A few executives nodded. I also believe, I added gently, that success doesn't always look the same from the outside. That wasn't an attack. It was truth. The room was quiet again, but this time attentive, not awkward. I'm proud of my father's dedication to this company, I continued, and I'm grateful for the work ethic he taught me growing up. That part was sincere, because despite everything, discipline had been modeled in our home. I just chose to apply it differently. Soft applause followed. I handed the microphone back, and that's when I finally looked at my father. His expression wasn't anger. It wasn't pride either. It was confusion, as if the story he had been telling about me for years had just been edited publicly. When I returned to my seat, my mother leaned closer. You never told us, she whispered sharply. You never asked, I replied gently. Across the table, one of my father's colleagues leaned toward him. You never mentioned she was the consultant, he murmured. My father didn't answer, because he didn't know. And for the first time in my life, the silence wasn't mine. The rest of the evening felt different. People approached me. Senior managers asked questions about analytics. Board members complimented the restructuring plan. A regional director even asked for my card. My mother stayed unusually quiet. My father avoided eye contact. But avoidance can't erase reality. As the event wound down, the CEO approached me privately. You handled that with grace, he said. I didn't want to overshadow tonight, I replied. You didn't, he said calmly. You balanced it. He paused. There's an opening on our advisory board next quarter. Consider it. That surprised me. I will, I said. Meanwhile, I could feel the emotional tension building elsewhere, because this wasn't just professional recognition, it was narrative disruption. For years, my parents had defined success in one dimension. Tonight expanded it, and expansion is uncomfortable for people who prefer categories. When we finally walked toward the exit, my father stopped near the doors. "Lily," he said quietly. I turned. His voice wasn't harsh, it was uncertain. "Why didn't you tell me?" There it was. Not accusation, just a father trying to understand. Because every time I tried to talk about my work, I answered honestly, it felt like it wasn't the right kind. He looked down briefly. "I didn't mean..." "I know," I said softly. But meaning and impact aren't always the same. We stood there for a moment, not arguing, just adjusting. My mother joined us. "We always wanted you to aim higher," she said carefully. "I did," I replied. "Just not in the direction you expected." That night, driving home alone, I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel victory. I felt alignment. Because being called nothing doesn't hurt as much when you know exactly who you are. But I also knew something else. Public validation shifts dynamic. And dynamics, once shifted, don't return to their original form easily. The retirement party was over. But the real conversation? It was just beginning. The ride home that night was quiet, not peaceful, not tense, just unfamiliar. My father drove. My mother stared out the window. I sat in the back seat like I had when I was 16, except nothing felt the same anymore. The retirement party had ended, but the hierarchy in our family had shifted, and everyone felt it. When we reached their house, my mother unlocked the door and walked inside without saying much. My father paused near the driveway. "Can you come in for a minute?" he asked. His tone wasn't commanding. It wasn't dismissive either. It was something I had rarely heard from him. Uncertain, I followed him inside. The house looked exactly the same as it had for years. Framed awards on the wall, certificates, photos of corporate events, smiling executives shaking hands, proof of success. We sat at the dining table, the same table where report cards had once been evaluated like quarterly performance reviews. My father folded his hands. "I need to understand something," he said carefully. "How long have you been doing this? At that level?" "Several years," I replied calmly. "But the work with your company started earlier this year." He leaned back slightly. "And you never thought to mention it?" "I mentioned my consulting work many times," I said gently. "It just didn't seem to count." My mother crossed her arms. "That's not fair," she said. "We just didn't see stability in it." "There was stability," I replied. "You just didn't see a building with my name on it." Silence. The truth wasn't aggressive. It was precise. My father rubbed his forehead slowly. "The CEO said you saved them millions." "I optimized operational inefficiencies," I said. The savings followed. He let out a quiet breath. "All those times I told people you were still figuring things out." "I know," I said softly. He looked up at me then. "And you let me." That sentence carried weight. "Yes," I answered honestly. "Because correcting you would have sounded defensive, and I didn't want to compete with you." That landed differently. My father had always thrived on measurable hierarchy. Promotion, title, recognition, but I had never wanted to compete. I wanted independence. My mother finally spoke again. "You should have trusted us," she said. I studied her face. "Would you have listened?" She didn't respond immediately, and that was my answer. The room didn't feel hostile. It felt recalibrated. For the first time, my achievements weren't invisible, but visibility can create discomfort, because now they had to reconcile something difficult. Their daughter wasn't behind. She was simply walking a different path. "You embarrassed us," my mother said quietly. I blinked. "I didn't say anything negative tonight." "You didn't have to," she replied. "Everyone looked at us like we didn't know our own child." I paused. "That wasn't my intention." "But it happened," she insisted. That was the first time I felt a flicker of frustration. "I didn't ask to be announced," I said calmly. "He chose to acknowledge the work, and you accepted it," my father added. "Yes," I said firmly. "Because shrinking myself to protect comfort isn't healthy." The words surprised even me, but they were true. For years, I had minimized details to avoid tension, downplayed contracts, skipped mentioning milestones, adjusted language so it wouldn't sound too ambitious. Tonight was different. Tonight, I stood fully in my work, and that felt right. My father stared at the table for a long moment. I never thought you were nothing, he said quietly. I held his gaze. But you said it. He nodded faintly. I meant you hadn't proven yourself in this world. I didn't need to prove myself in your world, I replied gently. I built my own. That was the core difference. Not rebellion, not resentment, autonomy. The conversation lasted another hour. No shouting, no dramatic apologies, just gradual recognition that assumptions had been wrong. Before I left, my father walked me to the door. I underestimated you, he admitted. I know, I said softly. He hesitated. I suppose I owe you congratulations. I smiled slightly. Thank you. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was progress. Driving home alone later, I reflected on something important. Success doesn't hurt people. Comparison does. My parents weren't angry because I achieved something. They were uncomfortable because their narrative about me no longer fit reality, and changing narratives requires humility. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from the CEO. Board reviewed your performance report again. Advisory position confirmed. Let me know if you accept. I stared at the message. This wasn't symbolic recognition anymore. This was structural inclusion, and accepting it would deepen the shift within my family. Because now, I wouldn't just be the quiet consultant. I would be positioned above many of the executives my father once stood beside. I knew that dynamic would be delicate. Power changes relationships, especially when it moves across generations. But I also knew something else. Declining opportunity to preserve someone else's ego is not strength, it's self-erasure. I typed a simple reply. I accept. And just like that, the story wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about stepping fully into who I already was. Still, I had a feeling the next family dinner would not be simple, because recognition in public is one thing. Adjustment in private? That's where the real transformation happens. Accepting the advisory position changed everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, but structurally. When the internal announcement went out, it was short and professional. Lily Anderson appointed to Strategic Advisory Board following successful operational restructuring initiative. No emotional language, no family reference, just qualification and outcome. But inside the company, titles carry weight. And within my family, they carry history. The first board session I attended felt different from consulting meetings. This time, I wasn't presenting data from the side of the room. I had a seat at the main table. A vote. Influence. My father was present too, of course. Though technically retired from executive authority, he had been invited as an honored former leader for transitional oversight discussions, which meant something subtle but significant. For the first time, I sat in a decision-making position higher than his, not because I aimed for that dynamic, but because merit placed me there. When I entered the room, conversations quieted slightly. Some executives greeted me with professional warmth. Others measured me carefully, but my focus wasn't on them. It was on him. My father kept his posture straight, hands folded on the table, composed, controlled, but I recognized the tension in his jaw. The meeting began. Market projections, supply chain updates, risk assessment. Then the CEO turned toward me. Lily, would you walk us through your revised efficiency expansion proposal? I stood, connected my tablet to the display, and began. Calm, precise, data-driven, no emotional undertone. I didn't reference my father. I didn't glance toward him, because this wasn't personal, it was strategic. When I finished, questions followed. Technical, analytical, valid. I answered each one directly. At one point, a senior director challenged a proposed cost redistribution model. Before I could respond, my father spoke. That adjustment may create pressure on mid-tier management, he said. The room shifted. Old authority still carried habit. I looked at him respectfully. It would, I agreed, which is why the support structure includes phased implementation and leadership training allocation. The short-term pressure stabilizes long-term performance. Silence. He hadn't expected agreement. He had expected resistance. The CEO nodded. That addresses the concern. And just like that, the discussion moved forward. But something subtle had changed. My father had contributed, and I had responded without defensiveness. No competition, no tension visible, just professionalism. After the meeting ended, he approached me privately in the hallway. "You handled that well," he said. "So did you," I replied. He studied me for a moment. "You didn't need to agree with me." "I wasn't agreeing to protect you," I said calmly. "You raised a valid point." He seemed almost surprised by that. "For years," he admitted slowly, "I assumed you avoided corporate structure because you couldn't compete inside it. I didn't react emotionally. I avoided it because I preferred building something I controlled." "And now?" he asked. "Now I contribute where I choose to." That distinction mattered. Power isn't about dominance. It's about agency. That evening, we had our first family dinner since the retirement party. My mother prepared everything meticulously, as she always did when something felt unsettled. The atmosphere was cautious but not hostile. Halfway through dinner, my mother finally said what she had been holding back. "It's strange," she admitted. "People keep calling to congratulate us." "For what?" I asked gently. "For raising a successful daughter." There was a pause. "And how does that feel?" I asked. She hesitated. Unexpected. "My father set down his fork. I spoke with the CEO today," he said. I looked up. "He told me something I didn't expect."